Welcome to this paper session, which is called Accreditation on the Move. I'm Ulf Hedbjörk from the Swedish Higher Education Authority, UKA, representing ENQA on the EQAF program committee here. During the next hour, we will have the opportunity to share some innovative approaches to the quality assurance of higher education. And we are happy to have with us today two highly qualified experts who represent both the institutional perspective, or maybe perspectives, and that of a quality assurance agency. They can't wait to share their experiences with you and perhaps even point out in what direction or directions quality assurance is moving or should be moving. So very welcome, Martin Prchal, Vice Principal at the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague, the Netherlands, and also very welcome Alexandre Wipf, Consultant at the Agency for Quality Assurance through Accreditation of Study Programs, AQAS, in Germany. And most welcome both of you. I shall leave the floor to you in a moment. At Accreditation on the Move, let's warm you up a little this late in the afternoon. That might be together with a cup of coffee, and we would like to make sure that you're still awake. So we've prepared a short poll question for you. It's a multiple answers question, so please choose all the alternatives you find important, or at least the most important ones. And you see the question, evidence-based quality assurance, what should be its main focus? I see some answers coming in. That's nice to see. And we think that maybe all these alternatives could interest you. So it's interesting to see that the answers are distributed fairly evenly, with a slight lead for the support to enhancement and quality culture. It's interesting. It's moving a little up and down. And we see that, well, it seems to be that enhancement and quality culture, so that quality assurance, external and internal quality assurance, should really have as its main focus to support enhancement and to support a quality culture within institutions. So, okay, let's keep it there. And our speakers, Martin and Alex, will most certainly be able to connect to some of your answers and the thoughts you have after this short poll. But we will not linger on that one. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. So please, Alexandre, stay on the floor. Alexandre Wipf is a referent and consultant at the Agency for Quality Assurance through Accreditation of Study Programs, AQAS, which is based in Cologne, Germany. As such, he's responsible for the organization and conduction of program accreditation procedures, and also acts as a main contact person for both higher education institutions and expert groups. In addition to national program accreditation procedures, he's been involved in international program accreditation and certification procedures of further education programs. Prior to joining AQAS, he worked in the central administration of a German university and for a representative association of higher education institutions in Brussels. Please, Alexandre, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you indeed, Ulf. I'm very pleased to be with you today online and all the participants. And my idea is to talk to you a bit about our experience as a German accreditation agency in using performance indicators in program accreditation. But first, let me give you a bit of a background and context on this topic. Compulsory external quality assurance in Germany can take the form of program accreditation carried out by accreditation agency, but it can also take the form of a procedure carried out by an institution itself after that institution has been awarded self-accrediting powers following an institutional accreditation. But today I focus on the program accreditation side of things that are organized by an agency such as AQAS. The approach in this procedure is a qualitative evidence-based peer review. The agency is in charge of the organization of the procedure, and the panel of experts conducts the review. There are 11 agencies operating in Germany, German agencies, foreign agencies that have been accepted to operate based on their listing on EQA. There is one central decision-making body, the German Accreditation Council, who takes the decisions on program accreditation. And in 2018, there have been some changes to the system with new criteria, with a new role for the German Accreditation Council, and with more prominent use of indicators, the topic of today. AQAS itself is registered on EQA. We've been reviewed by ENQA recently. We are 20 years old. In this time, we have reviewed about 7,000 programs in Germany and abroad. We mostly offer program accreditation and system or institutional accreditation, and on more ad hoc basis, certification procedures and evaluation procedures. But on to the main topic for today, indicators in program accreditation procedures. Higher education institutions are required to submit data when programs are to be accredited. They have to submit data on the completion rate and the distribution of students according to gender. They have to submit data on the grade distribution. Here it is the overall grade of the entire study program and not of single courses within the program. And they have to submit data on the average duration of studies for each program. For this data, there are templates that have been developed from the German Accreditation Council. Those tables are provided to the institutions. They should be used in the procedures, and they are included in the final expert report as well. We have to keep in mind in this context that there are no targets that have to be reached by the institutions. There are no attainment requirements. The only requirement is that data is provided and that experts use this data in their review. The fact that experts use data in the review is not new. This happened prior to 2018. But what happened in 2018 is that a common standard set of data has been defined that has to be used by all agencies in Germany, that has to be used for all program accreditation procedures in Germany, with common templates, as we mentioned, and the publication of these tables and this data in the final report. When these templates were published, the German Accreditation Council published a note, an explanatory note as well. And in there, it noted that it is indispensable for experts to look at the data and to use the data in the evaluation, which is not surprising. It noted as well that peculiarities in the data must be looked at by the experts. So, for example, if there is a sudden rise or a sudden drop in student numbers or graduate numbers, experts have to consider this. But what is a bit more interesting maybe is that the Accreditation Council mentioned that it will use the data as a kind of plausibility check when taking the final decision on the accreditation, comparing the data provided by institution and the evaluation of the experts in the expert report. Talking about our observations since these changes have been carried out, first of all, we have to say that experts always contextualize the data that they receive from the institutions. They do not just use the raw data and consider a number without any context. They always ask questions, try to find out the reasons behind the numbers in the discussions during the site visit. They especially use the data when considering study conditions. So, for example, when data shows that no student could complete the program in the foreseen time frame of 3 years, for example, they might see there an indicator that there are structural problems or that there is not enough support from the institution, and therefore ask maybe additional questions. At the same time, what we also observed when we look at the latest procedures that we carried out over the past year is that curricula remain the main topic of discussions and not data. More than 30% of all the recommendations that the expert groups gave last year were related to the curricula, to the courses, to the subjects, to the content of the program, and not to the data. Less than 4% of the recommendations were explicitly linked to the data, so to the gender distribution within the program, to the duration of studies. What we can also say is that the use of these templates and the fact that the templates and tables are published in the final report in a separate chapter has led to more transparency in the procedure and in quality assurance in Germany. There is still some reluctance at the same time, especially when you consider different kind of provisions. So distance learning, for example, to provide the data. At the very beginning, there were problems indeed. Institutions were not quite sure what kind of information should be provided, what kind of data, or to calculate a completion rate. If every student should be included, only students that completed the program on time, or other factors. These problems are being remitted. There have been new templates and new tables from the German Accreditation Council that provide now calculation formula. So institutions now know what to include. The experts know how to deal with the data because there is transparency from this side as well. It was interesting for us as an agency to see this at the very beginning because a lot of institutions asked us, what do you expect? What to do with this? And then the experts told us, what does this number mean when an institution wrote, for example, 46% completion rate? It was not clear what the number means, what is the basis for this. Now that there is a formula, it's easier to use these indicators in the procedure. There might still be discussions whether the formula is the best formula, but at least we have a basis for discussion. If we look at the way forward, we have to recognize that there are still some limitations in the system. We asked you the question at the beginning of the session, whether data and indicators and evidence should be used for benchmarking. This is not the goal of the use of data in the German system. Institutions are generally quite reluctant to benchmark against other programs, against other institutions. You have to keep in mind also that Germany is a federal state. That means that there is a question whether the programs or the institutions should be compared throughout Germany, in the regions that they are in, whether they should be compared per subject. There's a problem maybe of interdisciplinary programs that might not be easily benchmarked against other programs. And there's a problem of a common data basis. Because of the federal structure, there is no central systematic gathering of data that could be used as a benchmark in different areas. But there is also the question of accessibility and maybe the limited use of this data. Institutions gather the data that they do in the procedures for the experts to have a look at it. They obviously also gather data for the internal processes. But maybe the data and the effort put into gathering this data should be used for other purposes, for research or for policymaking. And this seems a bit different and difficult because the data that has been gathered in accreditation procedures is not that easily accessible. The tables are published in the reports are published in the database of the German Accreditation Council, but you cannot download just the data. You would have to download every single report, extract the data, and then you might use it.
Excuse me, Alexandre, last minute, excuse me. Yeah.
These are two of the limitations we can see in the current system in Germany. Obviously, I would love to learn more about other systems and what you are doing in your institutions, in your countries. But as Ulf said, there is not that much time left. So I do thank you for your time. And if Ulf would like to, we can go to the questions right away.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. Timekeeping is is always, but that's perfect timekeeping. Merci beaucoup. So I now open the floor to questions from the audience, and so far I can see we have at least one question. This is from Alexandra Pfaffen. Saying, yes, 11% of the program seems not to get a re-accreditation. What is the main reason? Or are there many different reasons? In the Netherlands, the main reason often has to do with assessment.
Well, that's a mistake from my part, depiction problem. What I meant by this is that 89% of the procedures are re-accreditation procedures. The 11% that are left are first accreditation procedures. So there you cannot use the data because you don't have the databases because the program is starting. So that's a problem in the depiction from my side and not in the procedures themselves.
I'm sure Alexandre is happy with the answer, clarification. So we have a second question. It's nice to see the questions popping up. And in the still relatively seldom case that expert groups refer to indicators data in their recommendations, which ones do they find most useful or perhaps most predictive of overall quality, would you say?
Well, the data on the average duration of studies is very often discussed because it gives an indication on the support system there or maybe structural problems that are present in the programs. But in most of the cases, they can find out the reasons behind this data by the questions that are asked during the site visit. And as we said, contextualization is important. So the different demographics within the institution, if there are first-time students that have a different background, or if students do work parallel to their studies, explain sometimes the data that is depicted. And this leads to the fact that they don't often then actually give a recommendation on this aspect because they're satisfied with what the institution is already doing.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions for you as well, but I think we should leave the floor to the audience as much as possible. Sure. So, Angelica Rust, your question to Alexandre is, hopefully I understood this correctly. AQAS provides a data from form, which higher education institutions can use during the accreditation process. If this is so, if yes, what indicators are listed on this form, and based on what criteria did you list these indicators?
Well, it is not just AQAS. It's a requirement for all agencies operating in Germany. The German system is maybe a bit different because there are many agencies active in Germany. So this form is developed centrally by the German Accreditation Council, the central body responsible for this in Germany. And this document developed by the council should be used by all institutions. And there we can support the institutions in the different procedures in providing the data, but this is not coming from AQAS directly. The second part of the question are the indicators were decided upon. I think I know that participants from the Accreditation Council are taking part in EQAF, and I think the question would be better directed to them. The agency has not decided which criteria and which indicators to include, but that was a development process within the entire higher education system in Germany.
Thank you very much. We have a question related to the reliability of data, and I think this connects fine to the opening session discussion about learning analytics and so on. It's Lasha who asks if you could please clarify how you ensure reliability of your data in this data gathering.
Well, the institutions have to provide the data by filling out the form and providing this to the experts. Data reliability has increased, I think, because there are now formulas to indicate how to come up with the completion rate and how to come up with an average duration of studies. Because in the very first version of the table that should be used, that was not clarified. I depict in the paper that you can download on the platform the first version and the latest versions, where you can see exactly what institutions have to complete. So the quality has risen, but I have to be honest at the same time, we do not check it because we do not have access to the internal quality and data system of the institution. And the institutions have, because of the contracts that they have and the procedures that they enter for accreditation procedures, to provide true and current data. So this is trust from every part of the system built in, I suppose.
Thank you, Alex. Alex mentioned the reports and other materials that you can find, of course, in the resources department of the whole conference. Possibly also here on the left-hand side toolbar, where you have the content library that you might find some files as well, download or uploaded. We have a question, we couldn't avoid the corona question. Thank you very much for that, Alexandra. So does corona influence the data, and how do peers deal with that? So that's of course the not so normal situation, but at the same time something that is real and have to deal with. How did you deal with that?
That is true. It is visible in the data depicted, especially in the duration of studies. You see an extension of the duration of studies. And because we try to always provide a room for contextualization within the procedure, experts always ask for the reason behind the data in the discussions during the site visit. And when the corona pandemic has influenced the duration of studies, this is given as an open answer by the institution. There is no shame behind it because it's unto our reality and the fact that external factors have an influence on the data as well. And because if I just may add, there are no targets, as I said, it's one aspect that has to feed into the evaluation by the experts, and no targets have to be reached. Therefore, the experts can always provide this, put this back into the context.
Thank you very much. We have another question, and which is sort of an extension of that question. Have you altered your own assessment processes because of this? And if so, will you maintain any of these in the future? I suppose this refers to the corona situation.
We, as agency representatives, are always present during the site visits with the expert panel. The expert panel is obviously in charge of the discussions with the institution and of the evaluation, but we can always provide the expert groups with some kind of support and background information on what data might mean. Obviously, the experts have to evaluate it themselves at the end. And the institutions also mention in their self-evaluation reports the influence of the pandemic. Our data might be interpreted because of this. But it is formally not our role as agency to evaluate the data. Because of the changes in 2018 in the German system, we are just, so to say, responsible for the organization of the site visits. The decision at the end is taken by the Central German Accreditation Council, and they might consider the data in a different light.
We have a question that popped up in the conversations area, and that's a very interesting question as well from Brian Maguire. Are the data collected subject to the European Open Data Directive? So the European Open Data Directive.
That is indeed a good question. I'm aware that many governments in Europe are trying to push also the use of open data gathered by public services through national open data strategies. I had a brief look at it when preparing the paper, what Germany is doing there. It's quite at the beginning, to put it diplomatically. It is not a very advanced area. That's why what Jens said in the very first session today, that we now have big data and open data in higher education. That might be the case some places, but not everywhere, and not on the system level in Germany, at least. So I believe the answer is no, the short answer.
It's nice to see all your questions, and if we don't have time to answer, or Alex will not have time to answer all of them, please contact him during the event in a private chat or in the lobby, or there's lots of possibilities. We have one here about weighting of indicators. Is there any weighting of certain indicators, so that different indicators might play a different role, have different significance in different accreditations?
There is no formal.
Thank you.
Yes, there is no formal weighting because there are no targets to be reached. So if data is not positive or seems to look bad, the experts have to put this into to feed that into their evaluation. Obviously, if the completion rate is close to 0 and if the study duration is extremely high, the experts might see problems in the program that have to be addressed. Usually, it is true that duration studies and completion rate are more important in the view of the experts compared to the distribution of the grades, for example. But that does not mean that grade distribution is not mentioned from time to time. 1 or 2 times per year is a topic that comes up.
Okay, thank you. It's an interesting thing. We know that in Germany, of course, the Länder or the states have the competence of higher education, but it's a relevant question, of course, if there is any discussion about national data collection from which the accreditation agencies then would collect it. How do you deal with the situation, which is a bit special to Germany?
It is correct. Higher education is a responsibility of the different federative states, and there might be different requirements what institutions in different states have to gather for their regional ministries. In the state in which our agency is based, but we're not limited to this state, there is a so-called ECTS data gathering program. And their institutions have to report on the amount of credits that have been completed by students every year, every semester. So kind of a progression estimate of the students in their studies. But this is not a federal mandate, and there is no federal database there. Federal rights are not a touchy thing, but an important topic in federal states. I'm French myself, so I have a personal, totally different experience in my life with a central decision-making government. So I would think that you need a change in the culture and the approach to autonomous and independence of institutions before you move on to a central gathering exercise. Sometimes it's discussed. There are studies on this that try to gather data for the whole of the country, but not in an organized manner by government.
Thank you very much. Maybe related to the last question that Ola posed, is there a difference of using data relating to different types of higher education institutions or between different subjects? There's not only the federal issue to deal with, but also the fact that institutions are different. How do you deal with that in this?
That is true. There is a diverse higher education landscape in Germany. You have universities of applied sciences, you have Conservatoires, Musikhochschulen, with different cultural backgrounds and different histories. It is possible to make maybe a difference between institutions that are a bit younger or those that are a bit more established. So a university that has a 100-year-old history with a very established structure in its administration and very established procedures might take maybe more time to gather more data or different data or to change its proceedings. At the same time, there are also very young institutions in our region, in North Rhine-Westphalia. There are some institutions that were created in the 2000s, so they are 15, 20 years old. So they might have a maybe more proactive approach to data because they've been doing this from the beginning. So you see a difference in between the sizes of the institutions and maybe between the subjects rather from the point of view of the expert groups. Some subjects might be more reluctant to consider data as a valid indicator in an accreditation procedure because they would like to concentrate more on the content or on the skills that the students develop and gain during the studies. Others see the use of data as one indicator among others and are quite open to use them.
Thank you very much, Alexandre, and thank you very much, the floor and the audience for all the questions. There are a couple of more of them there that might lead us a bit too far because we need to move on to the next presenter. But I'm sure, Alex, that you will perhaps write an answer in the question and answer section or so that they won't be left unattended. Thank you very much for all the questions, everyone. So it's time to move to our second speaker. So let me introduce Martin Prchal, who is the vice principal at the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague, in the Netherlands. Martin has an extensive career as a professional violoncellist and has had also various assignments in the fields of training at several Dutch conservatories. Martin was the first chief executive of the European Association of Conservatories, AEC, from 2001 to 2011. And his current post at the Royal Conservatoire includes responsibilities for curriculum, development and innovation, research, quality assurance, and international relations. Martin has also served as the chair of the board of MUSIQ, the Music Quality Enhancement, the international agency for evaluation and accreditation in the field of music. And he's the current vice president of the European Chamber Music Academy, ECMA. After this introduction, no further ado, please, Martin, take the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, dear colleagues, and thanks to Ulf and to Alexandre for giving such an excellent presentation. It is an honor to present for you today. I have to confess that even despite my background in the performing arts, I'm finding it somewhat daunting to do a presentation for such a large audience in this online manner. As I told Ulf, I'd rather play a live concert, actually. But there we are, and I sincerely hope that what I will share with you will be of interest to you all. Let me first emphasize that although it is me doing this presentation, the paper I will be talking about was a co-creation with 4 other excellent colleagues in 3 other Dutch institutions. And of these colleagues, Anneke Vierhout and Anoushka Heidlager are with us in this session. So if you may have questions about the case studies I will be presenting about their institutions, they will be able to share their expertise through the question and answer chat later on. So before I go on, just very quickly some information about the current Dutch system of accreditation so that you are aware of the context of our paper. Very briefly, the Dutch accreditation system is still heavily focused on accreditation at program level. And this can be done in 2 ways, as is shown on this slide, either through an extended program review or in a combination of an institutional review and a limited program review. In the meanwhile, we're seeing that the context of higher education is changing. For example, through digitalization or the need to provide more flexible pathways for both students and professionals. Are then the current arrangements for program review and quality assurance still relevant? The accreditation system in the Netherlands has also changed over time, for instance, through the use of less prescriptive standards, but with the emerging quality culture in programs, one wonders if there should not be an approach with less protocols and standardization than is currently the case. This is why a pilot was launched by the Dutch Ministry of Education, Culture and Science, which explores the possibility of setting up an institutional accreditation system in which institutions are given the responsibility for reviewing their own programs. 4 Dutch University of Applied Sciences have applied to be part of this pilot, and the paper describes what our first experiences are. We are aware that the system of institutional accreditation or institutional review, or however you call it, is already a common feature in several other European countries, but in the Netherlands, this development would constitute quite a substantial change of the national accreditation system. What we as institutions learned from this pilot can be described with reference to various developments, and one of them is the importance of professional space or professional agency. This emphasizes the importance of giving a certain amount of autonomy to professionals in making choices designed to improve the quality of the education. By giving professionals this autonomy, we believe the ownership of professionals, our professors and teachers, with regard to quality processes will also increase. An example of this can be seen in the case study of the Fontis University of Applied Sciences. What the institution has done there in the framework of this pilot was to give educational teams the opportunity to develop their own quality objectives that are of course compatible with the ESG. As you can see on the slide, this quality framework is then used to collect quality information, which is then reviewed during a visit of peers and finally published publicly. This led to quite different quality frameworks that were more tailor-made towards the needs of particular program and disciplines, which is a fundamentally different situation from the use of externally imposed standards. What has become clear is that such an approach will increase the professional agency of teachers and, as mentioned before, a stronger involvement of teachers in quality processes. Various fundamental questions needed to be answered, such as what kind of quality are we pursuing and how can we demonstrate this type of quality. As in the Fontis case study, the other case studies also emphasize the use of peer review. The confrontation with peers as experts in their field will ensure meaningful conversations about the content of the education and its quality. And also there, professional agency can be improved if there is flexibility in the ways in which peer review is organized. If done properly, teachers will consider peer review as a method called by some as evaluation as learning. In the case study of the Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences, the institution has tested different forms of peer review, again developed and proposed by the educational teams themselves. This has led to different approaches to the selection of the peers, to the program of the review visit itself, the form of the self-evaluation materials, or on reporting. The main thing is that educational teams can choose a method that is close to their culture and in doing so increase the ownership of the professionals and strengthen the development of a quality culture in the programs. And of course, also here, all processes must be compatible with the ESG. Speaking of quality culture, here you can see the famous definition of quality culture by the EUA. You will know it all, so I don't have to read it to you. But what is fundamental in this definition is the emphasis on values towards quality that are shared by the different stakeholders in the institution. This implies that these shared values are understood and that a common language is used to express it. This is a vital basis for the case study proposed by the Royal Conservatoire in The Hague, where so-called critical friends are employed to review the content of the education at discipline level. This is relevant in a context where one overarching program includes various departments. So a Bachelor of Music degree is offered by a department or jazz or early music or composition. The critical friends visit these departments and lessons, exams, final presentations, and they talk to students and teachers. They speak the language of the discipline and not the language of quality assurance, which is, in my opinion, very important. Still, they have to conduct their reviews to a set of comparable and internationally accepted standards. This approach has led to a substantially stronger involvement and ownership of students and teachers in quality processes and is strongly focused on enhancement, transparency, and based on dialogue. By using a framework that is comparable with the ESG, this approach is also formalized despite of its strongly informal character. We also dare to say it is quite rigorous, as it is directly connected to this discipline and its content, and provides specific feedback that is directly targeted to the daily educational context. By using international peers and internationally recognized standards, the institution is also able to benchmark itself internationally. Another case study that has made good use of the flexibility in the pilot is the approach used by the LOE, Leidse Onderwijsinstellingen University of Applied Sciences, which is a private institution that offers distance learning. Responding to experiences in the past, during which it seemed that peers had limited understanding of distance and blended learning, the institution developed a review method called the student experience, in which the peers were invited to follow a module within the digital learning environment themselves and a program of the review visit according to the didactic principles of the institution. This led to a greater understanding of the technical mechanics of the digital education provided by the institution for the peers, but also a stronger involvement of the educational teams in the development of this approach. Now, I already mentioned something about rigor before, and it must be clear we are not developing these differentiated approaches to make it easier for ourselves. I would say quite on the contrary. In any case, we would expect that the procedure for the institutional accreditation done by the Dutch authorities would be robust and based on national standards. It would then mainly be there to ensure that the internal systems that institutions use to review the quality of the programs are strong and relevant. By overlooking our experiences over the past few years, we believe that these developments will increase confidence, public confidence in the quality of education, confidence among professionals in how to deal with quality issues, and self-confidence among institutions and programs in showing they are taking the responsibility with regards to the quality assurance and quality enhancement of their education. So this is what I wanted to share with you today, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your questions, but also especially your comments on our experience in the question and answer chat. And of course, more information about the case studies itself, which I had to present to you only rather prestissimo, I would say today, can be read in the paper itself, and this can be found in the resource section. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. If not prestissimo, so I think it was vivace was a passable label for this presentation. Thank you very much. Very interesting to meet here the perspective of a particular kind of higher education institutions in a network. Also, struggling with the question of on the one hand the European standards and guidelines and national guidelines, and on the other hand a professional language and a way to talk quality, which can be quite different, and marrying these two perspectives was a very interesting case, I think. I have a first question for you, which is to do with what you mentioned as evaluation as learning. Could you give us a couple of examples, or an example of what would that mean to?
Sure. Well, I mean, what I always say is that I consider quality assurance as a method for learning. So this is really much kind of based on the belief that we're there to focus mainly on enhancement and on improvement, improving ourselves and our education. And what I've seen, if I may take an example from the critical friend reviews that we have done in my institution, is that by engaging in the teachers and the students in the dialogue about the education and its quality and what it means to discuss these issues, is really a kind of a learning method. So we have seen in these procedures with the critical friends that actually the dialogues and also the reports that were written up by the experts, to which we always had to write a response, that this was very much a kind of a learning process. And of course there are a couple of standards that we have to abide by. We have to kind of use the standards to give structure to the reviews, also to make sure that everything is compatible to the ESG, but they are providing kind of backdrop to the conversations that we've had with the professionals, with the teachers, and also with the students, in order to make sure that they understand what we're talking about, and also to give them this perspective of improvement.
Thank you very much. Myself, coming also from the quality assurance agency side, we also always struggle with the question of how standardization and criteria can allow for this flexibility and this ownership, actually, that you pointed out, that has been one of the visual substantial effects of your model, meaning that the top-down perspective that is always there, the bureaucratic top-down perspective, can be turned into something that is felt to be usable and useful, where everything actually happens, where education is actually taking place. So it's very interesting, I think. We have a question here now from Laura, who asks, since there's quite a strong external quality assurance structure set up already, are there groups who are more suspicious or less trusting of a more internal process, or has it been well accepted?
Well, I think this is exactly what I've been trying to say about also the use of this new methodology, and the new methodology that have been kind of tested by the institutions. I think that if you use these kind of new approaches and give more responsibility to people to devise them and to make them quite more applicable to their own disciplines and their own contexts, then I think the resistance, I think, slowly kind of disappears. And if we kind of think about, you know, the level of let's say compliance and also comparability, then you know, the model that we're kind of proposing is that there's going to be at the national level, there's going to be a system for the institutional accreditations with very clear national criteria, national standards, but that in the institutions there's going to be a lot of flexibility for programs and for educational teams to engage with quality in different ways. And in giving this flexibility, we believe that much of the resistance is actually going to be taken away.
That's an important point to make, I think. Great. Trying to make sense of the question and answer section, which is moving a little ahead of me. Forgive me if I forget an important question or two. We have a question from Denise about public confidence. Increasing public confidence also strictly depends on the effective measurement of learning outcomes. So what criteria does your model use in this direction?
Well, you know, this is a very difficult question to answer, because as I've tried to explain, you know, the different institutions use different models. So there is not one particular kind of answer to this question. But I think it's also a way of being transparent about what you have done. So again, if I may take the case of my own institution with this critical friend review method, we are really intending to publish all these reports and all the results of these procedures online very publicly. And by doing so, and by demonstrating that we take this very seriously, that we have found a model that is based in the direction of compliance, but also mainly also in the direction of improvement, I think we can be very transparent about how we deal with quality and how we demonstrate it. So it's really about being very transparent about it and being clear about what we have done and you know how it has functioned. I think this would be kind of my answer to the public confidence question.
Thank you very much. We talked. You have described the pilots. How do you see the future? This is Caroline asking. How do you see the future of evaluations after the pilot? Institutions, will they keep the freedom to choose their institutional framework, do you think?
Well, this is the big question right now, because it's a pilot, and we don't know if this situation is actually going to be accepted by the Dutch in the Dutch higher education situation. So there will need to be also a discussion in the parliament about it. It's still, in some corners, it's still quite controversial, but we believe that we are providing enough evidence that this model is actually an improvement from the situation that we had before. So we have to wait and see. But in any case, the institutions that have been part of this pilot are going to be well prepared for the situation that we can, if this new structure of the higher education accreditation system in the Netherlands is going to be implemented, then we are all very well prepared to take the next step. And of course, we hope that we will also be able to provide a little bit of inspiration to the other institutions about how they could engage with such a situation.
Yeah, there's also the interesting question of scaling after a pilot, or the life after the project phase or the development phase. Important to see how can these things realistically be scaled up or be implemented and also inspire others to embrace the framework. We have the question had to come, I think, about the critical friend. Thank you, Ole. What is the effect for a certain program if the critical friend is, well, critical?
Well, then, you know, the responsibility of the program and the institution will have to make a kind of a developmental plan to improve what he has or she has identified. So basically, how this happens is that the critical friend comes and he or she writes a report, and then the program has to write a response with a kind of a developmental plan on how they are going to be dealing with the recommendations. And then in a couple of years, the same critical friend comes back and checks what has been done with these recommendation. So it's a very kind of, I would say, developmental process, which gives a lot of responsibility to educational teams and programs much deeper in the institution than was before the case, where the accreditation procedures were actually rather general. So, it's giving a lot of responsibility to the educational teams about how they should be dealing with such an external quality assurance approach.
So that's interesting, because you could always put it, also the question the other way around, as Annelies does. If the critical friend is not critical enough, could that be a problem? I think in areas like, for instance, arts education, where people know each other very well, and maybe there are ties and bonds, could that be a problem?
Sure. I mean, this is something that, of course, we have considered. The way how we solve it is to use the international critical friends that don't know the institution or don't know the people who work in it. I mean, sometimes even internationally this can be a challenge, but I mean, this can be a this can be a solution to look for different peers in different countries. And then we also are making use of this international agency, Musique, who has a pair of experts, international experts that are also trained for this kind of role, and we work with them to find these experts. So they are not necessarily experts that we find ourselves. Mm-hmm. To keep the objectivity.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we won't have time to go through all the questions, but there may be some ways that, if you know Martin by now, and please approach him in the lobby or in the private chat function and continue the discussion. I would like to invite Alexandre up on the stage again, and sort of round up this very interesting session with a couple of questions for you to reflect on each other's presentations a little. And the first one to you, Alex, talking about professional agency and quality culture that Martin has showed us interesting examples of. In your view, how can quality assurance processes support professional agency in the best way, and thus create quality culture?
Well, in the framework of program accreditation in Germany, we have to work with a set framework and with the set criteria given. The different steps of the procedure are also defined. So it seems like we don't have that much flexibility, but it's falls upon us then as an agency to try, as was mentioned many times in Martin's presentation, try to make sure that every participant feels ownership in the entire procedure, that trust is built. And there, even though we have a strong framework, we have to try to make room for discussions within the procedure, so that the enhancement perspective, I would say, is represented as well, that the experts and the institution can have a discussion based not only on very formalistic criteria, maybe, but also on the development of the program there. And that's the responsibility of the agency, I would say, in the context of program accreditation.
Thank you. That's interesting, and I think you showed us in your presentation that if you have a table of very few indicators, that could create more problems than if you actually are more precise. So you revised your model, and it seems to me that the institutions appreciated clearer instructions, even though the number of indicators augmented, if I understood you rightly.
It's true. If you have more details or more clarity on what has to be provided, it's easier to deal with it. That doesn't stop the debate whether the criteria or the indicators themselves are relevant or not. There is still the debate going on, but at least everyone involved knows how to deal with them and what is expected of them, and what can be done with the data provided. So transparency within the procedure helps as well in bringing everything forward.
Okay, thanks a lot. Martin, I got a question for you as well, connected to Alex's presentation. Data collected by institutions normally is one thing, and data collected for accreditation purposes may be another thing. What are your ideas about how these two collections of data could be better aligned for fit for purpose for institutions?
Well, indeed, I think that's a very fundamental question, because what we want to avoid is that there's going to be a situation in which institutions have to collect data in a different way for many different purposes. That's a disaster. So I think the example of Alexandre was actually very good, because apparently there has been a kind of a process going on of alignment, that there would have to be collected certain things for certain for certain procedures. And then I think if you do that kind of over a longer period of time, then I think this could work rather well. The only the comment that I would like to make is what I thought was very interesting in Alex's presentation is actually the data were there, but most of the comments by the experts was actually on the curriculum, on the content. And this is, I think, very important, because my position in this is that really we should kind of move more from quantitative to qualitative methods, because this is where you can kind of connect into the content discussion, the discussion about the discipline with the people in the institutions and in the educational teams, because it's going to make much more sense to them. So this is what I want to say about that. I just got a very strange message to grab a drink or something like that. I don't know. So sorry, that kind of threw me off a little bit.
It's actually the system telling us that time's up, and so it's on me to conclude the session by thanking you, both of you, Alex and Martin, for really interesting sharing your experiences. And though they might have seen from the start quite coming from very different perspectives, I think they have married very well, and that when I've listened to it, and it has made a lot of sense. And thank you very much to the audience for contributing with relevant questions and bearing with us that we are a little, maybe a minute late for the drinks and the mingle thing.